The summer sun blazed overhead as Marcus Johnson stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the woman in the floral swimsuit lounging by his pool. Again. This was the third time this week he'd caught Karen Mitchell treating his backyard like her personal resort. The retired police sergeant felt his blood pressure rising as he watched her casually adjust the umbrella he had installed just last weekend. 25 years wearing the badge had taught Marcus patience, restraint, and following proper procedures. But after months of Karen's entitlement, trespassing, and blatant disrespect, Marcus realized sometimes justice needed a different approach. What happened next would have the entire neighborhood of Westbrook Heights talking for years to come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Johnson had always dreamed of retiring peacefully. After dedicating a quarter-century to serving and protecting the community of Ashford County, all he wanted was a quiet home where he could enjoy his hard-earned rest. This spring, he'd finally saved enough to install the in-ground pool that would transform his modest backyard into a personal oasis. The construction had taken months: permits, excavation, liner installation, plumbing, but the result was everything he'd hoped for. A pristine blue sanctuary where he could float away the lingering aches from old injuries sustained in the line of duty. Westbrook Heights wasn't the most exclusive neighborhood in town, but it was respectable, diverse, and normally peaceful. Most neighbors kept to themselves, offering friendly waves but respecting boundaries. Most neighbors except for Karen Mitchell. Karen had moved into the larger house 3 doors down about a year ago, and within weeks had appointed herself the unofficial authority on all neighborhood matters. She'd started the Community Watch Group, which seemed less focused on actual safety and more on policing trivial infractions like garbage cans left out too long or lawns not mowed to her exacting standards. She'd distributed a neighborhood guidelines pamphlet of her own creation, detailing everything from acceptable holiday decoration periods to approved paint colors, despite Westbrook Heights having no actual homeowners association. Marcus had first encountered Karen's overreach when she'd left a printed note on his door complaining about the pool construction noise, despite the work only happening during city-approved hours. He'd politely explained that all proper permits were in place and the temporary inconvenience would soon be over. Karen had smiled tightly, her eyes scanning his property with obvious judgment before saying, "Well, I just hope it won't be an eyesore. Some people in this neighborhood really care about property values." The thinly veiled implication wasn't lost on Marcus. As one of the few black homeowners in Westbrook Heights, he'd encountered plenty of coded language over the years. The pool was completed in early June, just as the summer heat wave hit Ashford County with record-breaking temperatures. Marcus had celebrated with a small gathering of friends, former colleagues from the force, and a few trusted neighbors. Karen had not been invited, but that hadn't stopped her from calling in a noise complaint to the very department Marcus had served for decades. The responding officers, recognizing their former sergeant, had awkwardly apologized for the disturbance. 2 days after the party, Marcus returned home from grocery shopping to find wet footprints leading from his back gate to his pool and back. Nothing seemed damaged, but the security system he'd installed captured clear footage of Karen and her husband Diana slipping into his yard, using his pool for nearly an hour, then carefully exiting as if they'd never been there. Marcus was furious, but decided to handle things professionally. He walked to Karen's house that evening and calmly showed her the footage on his phone. "Oh," Karen said, not a hint of remorse in her voice. "We didn't think you'd mind. It was so hot that day, and you weren't using it." She smiled, adjusting her cardigan. "Besides, neighbors should share amenities, don't you think?" "No, I don't think," Marcus replied evenly. "That pool is private property. It cost me my savings and is not a community resource. Please don't enter my property again without permission." Karen's smile had hardened into something cold. "You know, Marcus, you might want to adjust your attitude. Being neighborly goes a long way in Westbrook Heights. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was just the beginning." Over the following weeks, Marcus documented 7 separate incidents of trespassing. Sometimes it was Karen alone, sometimes with her husband, and twice with friends he didn't recognize. Each time, they accessed his yard through the back gate that bordered the community park, apparently believing the security camera wouldn't catch them, or, more likely, not caring if it did. After each incident, Marcus approached Karen directly, showing evidence and requesting she stop. Each time, her responses grew more dismissive, more entitled. The previous owners never minded sharing, or, "It's not like you were home to use." It, or his personal favorite, "I pay more property taxes than you do, so technically I'm subsidizing your water usage anyway." Marcus tried involving the neighborhood mediator, Robert Wilson, a respected retired judge who often helped resolve community disputes. The mediation session was a disaster. Karen arrived with a folder of printouts, satellite images with property lines highlighted, city codes regarding attractive nuisances, and inexplicably, Marcus's property tax assessment, which she must have obtained through public records. "I'm simply concerned about safety and community standards," Karen explained sweetly to Robert. "If Marcus wants to have this pool, he should understand the responsibilities that come with it." "The responsibility is mine, and I've fulfilled all of them," Marcus countered. "I've installed proper fencing, locks, and safety equipment, all exceeding code requirements. What I'm not responsible for is providing you with free access to my private property." Robert had tried his best, but ultimately could only offer a non-binding agreement that Karen refused to sign, claiming it restricted her rights to enjoy the neighborhood she'd invested in. Out of professional courtesy to his former colleagues, Marcus had been hesitant to file official trespassing complaints. Many were former subordinates, and he didn't want to create awkward situations by having them respond to calls involving their former sergeant. He'd spent decades building his reputation in the department, earning respect through fairness and integrity. Using police resources for what would be perceived as a petty neighborhood dispute felt like an abuse of those relationships. Instead, Marcus installed additional security measures: higher fencing, better locks, and more visible cameras. Karen and her allies responded by filing complaints with the city, claiming his security measures were unsightly and aggressive. A city inspector found no violations, but the message was clear: Karen wasn't backing down. The situation reached a boiling point during the 3rd week of July, when temperatures soared above 100 degrees for 5 consecutive days. Marcus had been visiting his sister in the next county, helping her recover from minor surgery. He returned, home to find what could only be described as evidence of a pool party in his backyard: discarded drink cups, a forgotten towel, and the pool water noticeably lower and in need of chemical treatment. The security footage showed Karen, her husband, and 4 other adults freely using his pool, drinking and laughing. At one point in the footage, Karen looked directly at one of the cameras and raised her glass in a mocking toast. Marcus sat in his living room for hours, watching that footage loop on his TV screen, feeling a slow burn of anger, unlike anything he'd experienced since taking off the badge. 25 years of law enforcement had taught him to respect rules, follow procedures, and believe in the system. But 25 years had also taught him something else. Sometimes, when the system fails, justice requires creativity. As the sun set over Westbrook Heights, Marcus Johnson, respected former police sergeant, model neighbor, and man of principle, began formulating a plan. Karen Mitchell believed she was untouchable, that her position in the neighborhood put her above basic respect for others' property and privacy. She'd taken advantage of his professionalism, his restraint, his reluctance to escalate. That was about to change. If Karen wanted access to his water so badly, Marcus decided it was time she got exactly what she wished for, just not in the way she expected. The next morning, Marcus drove to the hardware store with a list of supplies and a plan taking shape. In his mind, Karen Mitchell had spent months turning his retirement dream into a stress-filled nightmare. Now it was time to return the favor by teaching her a lesson about boundaries she wouldn't soon forget. Marcus's plan wasn't about revenge. At least that's what he told himself as he filled his cart at Ashford Hardware. This was about consequences, about restoring balance, about teaching someone that boundaries matter. As a police officer, he'd seen countless situations where people mistook kindness for weakness, where entitlement festered until checked. Karen needed that check, and if conventional methods had failed, then unconventional ones would have to suffice. His purchases were simple but purposeful. A heavy-duty sump pump, several lengths of flexible hose, waterproof motion sensors. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And various connectors and clamps. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would raise eyebrows, just ordinary maintenance equipment that any pool owner might need. The installation took most of the afternoon. Marcus positioned the pump at the pool's edge, carefully concealed by the decorative rock feature he'd installed last month. He ran the flexible hose along the fence line, hidden by ornamental grasses, with the business end poised just beside the back gate, the very entrance Karen and her friends had been using. The motion sensors were placed strategically to detect anyone approaching from that direction. The system was elegant in its simplicity. When triggered, the pump would activate, drawing water from the pool and directing a concentrated spray toward the gate area. Not enough to cause injury, but certainly enough to deliver a thorough, unexpected soaking to anyone attempting to enter. Marcus had calculated the angles perfectly. There would be no escape, no staying dry, no dignified retreat. With the mechanical preparations complete, Marcus moved to the second phase of his plan. He sent a group text to several trusted neighbors, mentioning he'd be away for the weekend visiting family. He made sure to copy Tom Hayes, his former colleague who lived across the street and who he knew was friendly with Diana Mitchell. The information would make its way to Karen, a deliberate breadcrumb trail leading her right where he wanted her. Next, Marcus called Emily Chen, a local journalist he'd met during his time on the force. Emily had recently been covering stories about property disputes and community tensions in changing neighborhoods. Their conversation was casual, catching up as old acquaintances, but Marcus made sure to mention the ongoing situation with his trespassing neighbor. "It's really about more than just the pool," he explained. "It's about respect, about acknowledging boundaries in a diverse community." Emily's journalistic instincts were immediately engaged. "That sounds like it might fit into the series I'm working on. Would you be open to talking about it on the record sometime?" "Maybe," Marcus replied. "Let me think about it and get back to you." The seed was planted, not a commitment, but a possibility. One more piece carefully positioned. On the board. Friday arrived, and Marcus made a show of loading his car with an overnight bag, making sure to wave to Tom across the street. He drove away from Westbrook Heights, but didn't go far. He checked into the Ashford Motor Lodge just 2 miles from his house, a modest establishment where the manager, another former colleague's brother, was happy to give him a room with no questions asked. Saturday morning, Marcus returned to his house before dawn, entering through the front with his spare key, careful to make no noise and leave no sign of his presence. He settled into the spare bedroom with a perfect view of the backyard, equipped with binoculars, his phone set to record, and a small cooler of sandwiches and drinks. Now he waited. The summer heat built quickly that day, the temperature climbing past 90 degrees before noon. Marcus remained patient, remembering stakeouts that had lasted days rather than hours. His training served him well. Stay still, stay. Focused, watch for patterns, be ready. At 1:37 p.m., movement at the back fence caught his attention. Karen, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and carrying a beach bag, approached his gate with the confidence of someone who believed they had every right to be there. Behind her followed Diana, looking considerably more nervous, and another couple, Marcus, recognized from community watch meetings. Karen checked her phone, likely confirming Marcus was away, then produced what appeared to be a copy of his back gate key. That explained how they'd been entering so easily, despite the locks. She must have made a copy during one of her earlier trespassing excursions. Marcus felt a flash of anger, but forced himself to remain calm. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the culmination of his planning. He watched as Karen unlocked the gate, stepping confidently onto his property as if she owned it. The motion sensor triggered with a subtle flash that only Marcus could see from his vantage point. 3 seconds later, the pump activated with a low hum. A powerful jet of cold pool water erupted from the concealed hose, catching Karen directly as she held the gate open for her companions. The spray hit her with enough force to knock her designer sun hat into the air, drenching her completely in an instant. Her scream of shock echoed through the backyard. Diana jumped backward, colliding with their friends, all of them now caught in the steady stream of water that continued to pump relentlessly. Karen tried to push through it, but the pressure kept her pinned in the gateway, her beach bag now a sodden mess at her feet. "What is happening?" she shrieked, makeup running down her face, her carefully styled hair plastered against her head. Marcus watched through his binoculars, recording everything. Karen finally managed to stumble backwards, away from the spray, looking down at her drenched designer outfit in horror. Diana and their friends were similarly soaked, backing away from the gate as if it had become electrified. "This is outrageous," Karen shouted to no one in particular, seemingly forgetting she was trespassing on private property. "I will call the police right now." Marcus smiled. That was exactly what he'd been counting on. 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of his house. Officers Williams and Rodriguez, both of whom had worked under Marcus years ago, approached the scene with professional caution. Karen, still dripping wet, launched into an impassioned explanation about being assaulted by a dangerous water trap while innocently visiting a neighbor. That was Marcus's cue. He calmly walked out his front door, surprising everyone present. "Officers," he greeted them formally, "I see you've met Ms. Mitchell. I believe she was just explaining how she used a copied key to unlawfully enter my property, despite multiple previous warnings." The officer's expression shifted immediately upon seeing their former sergeant. Karen faltered mid-sentence, suddenly realizing the precariousness of her position. "Sergeant Johnson," Officer Williams nodded respectfully. "We received a call about some kind of water incident." "Yes," Marcus replied, holding up his phone. "I have video evidence of Ms. Mitchell and her companions attempting to trespass on my property today. This follows numerous documented incidents over the past several months, all of which I can provide footage for. As for the water, my automated pool cleaning system must have activated when it detected unauthorized entry. A safety feature, you understand." Officer Rodriguez fought to maintain her professional demeanor, but a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth betrayed her amusement. "I see. And you were home today, sir. We were informed you were out of town." "Changed my plans," Marcus shrugged. "Fortunate timing, it seems." Karen, realizing how quickly the situation was turning against her, attempted to regain control. This is ridiculous. He deliberately set up a trap to assault us, and we weren't trespassing. We were invited previously. This is a neighborhood dispute about pool access that he's blown completely out of proportion. Do you have documentation of that invitation, ma'am? Officer Williams asked. Well, not exactly, but... And is that a copy of Mr. Johnson's gate key in your possession? Karen fell silent, looking down at the key still clutched in her hand. What followed was precisely what Marcus had anticipated. The officers took statements from everyone present. They examined the water trap, which Marcus calmly demonstrated was simply an adjustable pool cleaning system that could be activated manually or automatically. They reviewed the security footage showing not just today's attempted trespass, but several previous incidents. In the end, Karen was issued a formal warning for trespassing, required to surrender her copied key, and informed that any future unauthorized entry onto Marcus's property would result in criminal charges. Diana and their friends received similar warnings, all documented officially in police reports that would be on file permanently. But Marcus's plan extended beyond this single confrontation. By Monday morning, Emily Chen had gotten wind of the incident through her sources at the police department. She contacted Marcus, who agreed to an on-record interview about community standards, property rights, and the challenges faced by homeowners in changing neighborhoods. The resulting article, published in the Ashford County Chronicle under the headline, "Boundaries and Respect When Neighborhood Disputes Cross the Line," never explicitly mentioned race, but the subtext was clear to anyone reading between the lines. The story spread quickly through Westbrook Heights. Neighbors who had previously stayed silent about their own encounters with Karen's overbearing community watch began sharing experiences. The community center hosted an impromptu meeting about neighborhood relations that was really a referendum on Karen's behavior. Robert Wilson, the neighborhood mediator, found himself fielding complaints about the very person who had filed so many herself. Karen's position in the community crumbled swiftly. Her community watch group disbanded when no one showed up for the next scheduled meeting. Diana, embarrassed by the public exposure and the whispers that followed them around the neighborhood, insisted they take a step back from community involvement. The final blow came 3 weeks later when Marcus hosted a neighborhood pool party, a proper one, with formal invitations to every home in Westbrook Heights, including Karen and Diana's. The invitation included a handwritten note. "All are welcome when properly invited. No trespassing necessary." Most neighbors attended, bringing dishes and drinks, children splashing in the pool, while adults chatted on the patio Marcus had expanded for the occasion. The atmosphere was relaxed, friendly, exactly the kind of community gathering that made suburban living appealing. Karen and Diana did not attend. In fact, they were rarely seen outside their home in the weeks that followed. Rumors circulated that they were considering selling their house and moving to a neighborhood with a more structured HOA environment. Marcus found himself in an unexpected position, not just accepted, but respected by his neighbors, many of whom had previously kept their distance. His firm but measured handling of the situation had resonated with the community's sense of fairness. Several residents even approached him about forming a proper neighborhood association, one based on mutual respect rather than petty rule enforcement. As summer transitioned to fall, Marcus sat by his pool in the cooling evening air, reflecting on the events of the past months. The water was calm now, undisturbed by unauthorized swimmers. His retirement had taken an unexpected detour, but perhaps that was for the best. 25 years of police work had taught him that justice sometimes required creative approaches, that rules without respect were just words on paper, and that communities, like individuals, needed occasional reminders about the importance of boundaries. The lesson he'd taught Karen had rippled outward, creating something better than what had existed before. And as for his pool, It remained exactly what he'd always intended it to be, a private sanctuary, enjoyed on his terms by those he chose to welcome. The water trap had long since been dismantled, its components repurposed for actual pool maintenance, but its legacy remained in the form of respect that now flowed through Westbrook Heights as naturally as water itself. As autumn leaves began to fall around Westbrook Heights, Marcus found himself reflecting one evening while sitting on his back porch. The neighborhood had transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. Karen and Diana Mitchell had listed their house for sale last week, their moving truck already parked in the driveway most days. The for sale sign stood as a silent testament to how thoroughly the community had rejected their behavior. What surprised Marcus most wasn't Karen's downfall, but how the incident had united Westbrook Heights. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged casual waves now stopped to chat. Weekend cookouts became regular occurrences. Children played together on front lawns while parents supervised from porch swings. The invisible barriers that had subtly divided the community, not just racial but economic and social, had begun to dissolve. Tom Hayes dropped by that evening, bringing a six-pack of craft beer and settling into the chair beside Marcus. They watched the sunset reflect on the pool's surface, now surrounded by potted chrysanthemums in autumn colors. "You know, I've been thinking," Tom said after a companionable silence. "What happened with Karen wasn't really about the pool at all, was it?" Marcus considered this. "No, I don't think it was. The pool was just a symbol. For her, it represented something she felt entitled to despite not earning it. For me, it was about boundaries, respect. 25 years wearing the badge," Tom mused. "And sometimes I think we learn more about justice from situations like this than from any departmental training." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what his friend meant. Throughout his career, he'd seen how the law, while necessary, sometimes failed to address deeper issues of dignity and respect. The water trap that had caught Karen in her trespassing had done more than enforce a property line. It had exposed entitlement that had gone unchallenged for too long. The following weekend, Marcus hosted the first official meeting of the Westbrook Heights Community Association, a voluntary group focused on genuine connection rather than rule enforcement. 36 neighbors gathered around his pool, which now symbolized something entirely different: community built on mutual respect rather than control. As Marcus looked around at the diverse faces, different ages, backgrounds, ethnicities all engaged in warm conversation, he recognized that his small act of resistance had catalyzed something more meaningful than mere revenge. In standing up for his boundaries, he had helped create space for others to assert theirs. Emily Chen's follow-up article titled "How One Neighborhood Found Its Voice" ran in Sunday's paper, featuring interviews with several residents about the positive changes in Westbrook Heights. The story never directly mentioned the incident with Karen, focusing instead on the community's evolution. That evening, alone again by his pool, Marcus felt a sense of peace settle over him. The water he had protected so fiercely now reflected stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. He realized that true justice wasn't about punishment, but restoration, restoring dignity, balance, and harmony. His years as an officer had taught him to uphold the law, but this experience had reminded him why those laws existed in the first place: to protect the boundaries that allow communities to flourish. The lesson he'd taught Karen had become a lesson for himself as well, about the power of standing firm, the importance of community, and how sometimes the most effective response to disrespect isn't escalation, but a carefully directed mirror that allows people to see their own actions clearly. Marcus smiled as he dipped his feet into the cool water of his pool. This sanctuary was his, but its purpose had expanded. It remained a symbol of his retirement dreams, but now it also represented something larger, a community finding its way forward together, one respectful boundary at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.